IronOverload.io hardcore episode 77 coming your way. Today we're going to be doing a French Canadian, Antoine Vaillant Steroid Cycle. And
Yes.
Mobster and I were kind of debating on the pre-show how to pronounce his name. Mobster was like, "You got to do it with the French accent, the French Canadian accent."
Style. Yes, Antoine Vaillant.
So in this
That's what
podcast 77, we're going to kind of go over Antoine's entire life and career. Really interesting. And Mobster is going to touch on some of his early life, which is really fascinating. Basically, the comeback kid. And it was a really interesting article that Mobster and I read about him, about how he went through a lot of stuff. So we're going to get into that.
multiple times, man. Yeah.
We're going to get into his diet, his training. And of course, we're going to speculate on his steroid cycle because he does keep that pretty hush-hush as he's still active, and he just competed in the Mr. Olympia a couple years ago.
There's bits of information, but there's no stack laid out for us, which is what we really wanted.
But we're gonna hit this either way, Mobster. So look, Antoine, he was born in 1987, Montreal, Canada. He started bodybuilding at 15 years old. He loved watching Arnold movies to pump himself up. The two body parts that were his favorite that he wanted to copy Arnold with arms and the chest. So he started doing push-ups every day. Didn't get him as far as he hoped. So this led him to join a gym. He experienced rapid improvements to his physique. He tapped into those genetics, those French Canadian genetics, and it helped push him even further. So he earned his pro card by winning the 2012 Canadian Nationals. From there, he finished 14th at the New York Pro and in 2013. And he got 16th at the IFBB Toronto Pro Super Show, which was last place. So what happened there? Why did he start dropping off? So during this time, he went through some heartbreak via a breakup with his girlfriend, and then he spiraled into drug addiction. So I'll bring in Mobster to kind of tell the story.
Yeah, no, there's multiple interviews, and I've seen some of the earlier bits of information here. I'm going to say, and I think he would admit to it himself, Steve, he has an addictive personality, and he wasn't to put it crudely, wasn't handling his shit very well. Listen, we've all been in those situations with death, divorce, breakups, or whatever else, and maybe go out and have a few brews with your mate, get it off your chest, etc., Steve. But he was a younger person then, and he fucked up multiple times. And this is, again, being brutally honest in his interviews that he's done. He talks about working with a coach, and the coach was allowing him to sleep there, but then he started taking drugs at the house. So they threw him out. He had no choice. Talks about having to get relapsed multiple times. He's done whole fucking online videos, some of which have been taken down since then because he has recovered. He has made progressed positively since then. But yeah, back in the day, Steve, we're talking about what we're looking at here, 2013, 2014. It's probably the time I saw the videos. And then he was like going out and fucking binges for days and days at a time, partying in that euphemism that people like to use, which essentially means they went round to each other's house and did drugs. And this was a big time fucking problem for him. But I think he's matured, Steve, not to fast forward too much. He understands his addictive personality. He understands where he can have what we call positive addictions. And there's an argument to be made, Steve, a positive addiction to training, positive addiction to being, because how well does he come across on camera? He's always smiling. He comes across really well talking to people. He kind of even understanding himself and talking about himself. He doesn't fucking run away from it, although he doesn't go right into it anymore, which he has done. He sat in front of the camera back in the day and literally said, this is what I do. This is what I was doing. I know I fucked up. Lots of people don't even admit that kind of stuff. So, you know what? In a way, Steve, he's a great example of someone that's finally realized what their fucking issue is, finally realized how to deal with it, and just fucking owning it. He talks about the 12 steps, and literally, I think he says, like, the first step is admitting you've got a problem, as opposed to, I'm just partying, I'm just going to see my buddies, I've had a fucking shit life. Whatever. Motherfucker, you go to the gym, smash a fucking granny out sheet, you've got some of the greatest genetics in the world. That is a positive addiction. It may hurt the joints a bit sometimes, Steve. Maybe you're training too much. But I would rather you do fucked up shit like that. I've got a buddy exactly like this, Steve, was a cokehead back in the day. And he's 100 miles an hour now, but if he goes to the gym and works his shit out, he's the one with custody, so God knows what the girlfriend was like. He's got custody of his kid. And I've actually said to him, mate, this is the reason why you are a driven motherfucker, is because that's the kind of person that you had. And when you didn't have anything to fucking do, you were doing drugs. And I think this is absolutely Antoine's. As he's matured, He's got his shit together. He's handled it so much better. And so, yeah, in a way, Steve, coming across on camera, doing a podcast, doing the Ask Me Anything that he does, that is going to appeal to a certain percentage of the audience, even with the fucked up background.
He chose the right place to have this issue, because in Canada, in most of Canada, I don't know much, as much about Canada as Canadians who listen to this, but Canada, you have access to places like this, which the government pays for. In most of America, this isn't the case. In most of America, if you're a drug addict, you're probably going to end up homeless under the underpass. And it's sad because a lot of them are veterans. There's no financial reason for someone to open up a rehab clinic. It's got to be a volunteer. It's got to be through, a faith-based organization,
charity, that kind of thing. Yeah.
And the problem with faith-based, church-based rehab clinics is their strategy for dealing with people with addictions like this is through shaming you to death, through guilt tripping you to death, and all that stuff. So there's it's pretty much almost 100% chance that you're going to relapse because it doesn't work. So you have to find a rehab clinic. If you have relatives going through this, you have to have find a rehab clinic that is going to rehab them the correct way. And there's a step program that you have to go through. Shaming someone, pointing at them, putting them down, insulting them, telling them they're going to go to hell and all this stuff.
Let me jump in for a second here, Steve. I've mentioned it on the forums, and I've told you pre-show and during the shows that we've done before. I've had two brothers, both of who passed away now. I'm the eldest, so it should have been me first, but I'm not quite there, ready to go yet, who've had addictive issues. One was a heroin user and kind of half cleaned his act up on some methadone when he managed to become a father. And the other one was most recently, as you know, early last year, should I say, was an alcoholic, doing a bottle of whiskey a day. So, and he had the opportunity, both of those have had the opportunity to go to rehab at one time or another, and essentially refused. One because it was too far away, which is stupid, it's supposed to be. And the other one because he wouldn't fucking admit he was an addict. You need to own this shit. And even the rehab places that you mentioned, just to finish off, the failure rate can be enormous if the person doesn't own the fact that they're an addict. So, yeah, I mean, look, right, with Antoine, not to hammer this point too much, but it is a big part of who he is or was, and possibly, arguably, Steve, maybe even a perverse way where he became famous because he was out there admitting to this shit and dealing with this stuff and fucking his potential up, is that he owned it and he had to fail multiple times to get right down to the bottom before he could come back out again. So let's move on a little bit in terms of his social media and what he does now, Steve.
Yeah, well, let's talk about his comeback first. We got to talk about the comeback. So he did make a comeback, and in he got fourth place at the Toronto Pro in 2018. Amazing comeback, because 4 years prior he was basically OD'd and ODing himself. Seventh at the 2020 New York Pro and first at the 2020 California Men's Pro. So Mr. Olympia in 2020, he got 14th place, which is fucking amazing. 14th place.
Yes, it doesn't sound much, but it is. Yes.
Yeah. And then in 22, he tied for 70. There's a huge list of guys who got 17th place. What is that all about, Mobster?
The reality is
that because the post-COVID, they let a lot of people in, and basically
I think they may have done that particular year, Steve. You might be right, and it's not unusual. Realistically, the Mr. Olympia should only have 20 athletes on stage, and the rules
basically, I guess he tied for last place
30 on stage that year.
Which, again, just tying for last place on Mr. Olympia is still a great showing.
Still, exactly, yeah. So, you're still top 30 in the world.
Yeah, you're still the top 30 bodybuilder in the world. So that's out of 7 billion people, you're top 30 at whatever you're doing. Okay, so social media, look, he's all over the place on social media. And I think it's part also, I think that helps him as well, because it's almost like
it's like
because he knows, hey, these people depend on me to do this. So if you've got something to care for, that's another thing with people who are rehabbing. If you have something to care for, you will keep yourself out of trouble. I don't want to go and be under the underpass and because my cat or my dog needs me, or my son
Oh
needs
man,
me,
yeah.
or my
Yeah.
wife needs me. You know what I'm saying? So that
I
always
told my
helps.
brother that get yourself a fucking dog, go out and walk a little few steps every day,
Exactly.
and yeah, just looking after something else.
And they'll love you, for however you are. So he's
Yeah,
got, and what's interesting, he's got Twitch, which I'm not familiar with Twitch. Maybe you are,
we're too
Mobster.
old.
Yeah, I have no fucking clue what Twitch is, but he has it. He's got YouTube, he's got Instagram, he's got
Yeah,
personal website and store. He's got promotions and businesses for shoes. I haven't seen a guy promoting shoes, so that's interesting.
no, not for a long time.
And then supplements, equipment, he also does, which I've seen with a few guys, but not very many. And he's got ebooks. And another thing, obviously, the podcasts and interviews, he
A
likes to
lot,
keep
a
in the
lot. Yes,
limelight. He likes,
yes.
I think he's one of those guys, they never turn down an interview. Like if we hit him up and we're like, Antoine, you want to come on? I think I interviewed him actually with Coach Trevor years ago.
Well, there you go then.
So
Yeah,
I think I remember interviewing him at least one time. I think maybe even twice. We interviewed him and another bodybuilder together who were French Canadian. So I remember doing him. So he likes to do podcasts for sure. So let's get into his diet, and then Mobster will kind of touch on his training, and we'll get into his steroid cycle. So look, he likes to go carb heavy and protein heavy with a small amount of fat. That's what works for him. It may not work for you. It may, but I get the feeling on this type of diet, he wants to keep the carbs low. He wants to keep his insulin. He wants to stay, um, I'm sorry, he wants to keep the carbs and protein high. He wants to keep the fats low. This is his strategy. So it's kind of like an anti-ketogenic diet. And it works for him. And it's very efficient. It's very simple. I'll give you an example of a day for him. He's got 6 meals. First meal is 8 egg whites, 8-ounce X lean steak patty, 1 cup of oats. Meal 2 is a 10-ounce chicken and 2 cups of white rice. Meal 3 is 10-ounce chicken, 10-ounce sweet potato. 10-ounce chicken, 1 cup white rice is meal 4. Meal 5 is 10-ounce white fish with veggies only. And then meal 6 is a protein shake before bed. So he also does 30 minutes of bicycling before he eats, which is fasted cardio. So the reason for fasted cardio, and we see a lot of pro bodybuilders do this, and a lot of people are doing this now. And it used to be taboo back in the day because people are like, oh my God, you can't do fasted cardio, burn your muscle. But here's the thing. The way our bodies are structured, it's not going to target your muscles first. It's going to target fat first when once the glycogen burns up, right? So this is a great way to burn extra fat and get your body in fat burning mode right off the bat in the morning. So this is a great strategy. So this is why they do it. And it works. It works incredibly well, and it will not burn away your muscle, guys. Now, if you do fasted training and you don't have anything and you go in and you do heavy lifting, power lifting, Olympic style lifting, then yes, it will affect your strength, because not having the glycogen in the muscles is a disadvantage because you go into your training with flatter muscles, you see? So, and if you want to get more pumps, then obviously you want a carb load before your training. You'll get more pumps unless you're taking anabolic steroids or you're taking a supplement that increases pumps. But you get my point. So there's certain situations where fasted training and fasted cardio aren't beneficial. But in this case, it is. And in 99% of situation, it is. Now, Mobster, the way Mobster trains, he's a power lifter. He's not a
yeah,
bodybuilder. The way
yeah.
Mobster trains, I would say Mobster, an hour and a half or 2 hours before your workout, get in some good clean carbs, some eggs,
Yes.
some fruit, maybe a couple pieces of good quality oatmeal or something like that. You want to fill up those glycogen a little bit. This way, when you lift, it gives you an advantage when you're powerlifting.
Yes.
So I would say out there, I get this question a lot. Follow what Antoine is doing in 99% of situations, unless you are specifically going in there and you want to set a new personal record, or you want to specifically strength train and really push the boundaries. That's what I would recommend. Also with supplements, he's got a lot of supplements, multivitamins, liquid carnitine he likes that, pre-workout pump products, whey protein, glutamine, and carb supplements are things that he mentions. So Mobster, why don't you get into his training now?
Right. So Steve and I talked about this in the pre-show. I'm going to take a slightly, and I mean slightly different thing. I could quite easily, listeners, and I've got a sample routine that you use for chest, and read that out to you and talk about the way that you train. But let me do something different, purely simply because He did a show on this. He talked about this himself, and I think it's super, super important. Right? If you are a bodybuilder, and I would argue that most of our listeners train for shape, bodybuilding purposes, extra, Steve, he says he's always had a great mind-muscle connection to his lower body, specifically quads. And in fact, arguably, Steve, he's got amongst the world's best set of calves. And in fact, that was debated some years ago, him and a couple of other athletes in the feature of muscular development, the late magazine. And they arguably, the three of them had the three best set of calves in the world. And it's one of those things where sometimes it's very easy, and people have made careers out of this, arguably to let part of the reason why Tom Platz did so well is because of his amazing quads. So he says, great mind muscle connection with my lower body, but not so much with my upper body. So what he was doing before the penny drop, Steve, he would do the whole goddamn stack on rows, for example, or pull downs, or 5.5 plate deadlifts, all this kind of stuff. And it's real easy, right? And I prop because I'm a lifter. That's what I'm doing. That's what I'm aiming for. But I'm not a bodybuilder. So the argument then becomes, do I need to be doing the whole goddamn stack if I'm not producing, in his case, a world-class back? And the argument is no. So how does he win competitions? Well, what he did, Steve, is he took a step back and he realized that doing the whole goddamn stack for 15 reps or whatever else wasn't fucking working. So it then become half of stack or 3/4 of the stack and slowing shit the fuck down. So, for example, and I'll touch upon this chest routine now, Steve. Pec deck flies, so that's almost a warm-up, and he does that 3 sets, 15 reps at a time, and they made the point of saying that was a burnout. So in other words, he's really trying to pre-fatigue his chest. And again, I guarantee you, Steve, even if that is close to the stack, because most pec decks don't have a heavy stack, it's about pre-fatiguing for the exercise that comes next. So notice he's focusing on getting that sensation into the muscle, and you're not going to build massive pecs with a pec deck. That's not really how it works. Machine a decline chest press, 4 sets of 10 reps. Nothing crazy there, but again, he's already done the mind muscle connection with the pec deck. So now he's got a fucking chest pump, I guarantee it. Dumbbell chest press, 4 sets of 10. Not unusual there, Steve, but again, now we're using free weights. So you've gone from machine exercise to an exercise where your stabilizers, your shoulder muscles, your rotator cuff muscles are already tired. So now it's that much harder to do the dumbbell chest press, Steve. And again, you're pre-fatigued the chest, you've really fucked up the pump, you've done a heavy decline chest press, which is emphasized on the bottom of the chest there. And now the dumbbells, they'd want to wobble. They'd want to be all over the place. It's going to be much harder to do the dumbbells at this point. So notice again, he's being clever here, Steve, with the pre-fatigue, with the mind-muscle connection. And the last one is machine incline press. I'd actually argue in terms of modern bodybuilding, you see this way more than you did in Arnold's day, purely and simply because we like to see in the modern bodybuilder chest development bottom, middle, and top. It used to be bottom heavy all the time. But again, he's gone back to a machine here because after the exercises he's done and the way that he's put this little routine together, it's only 4 exercises, no 8, 9, 10 exercises. I get this workout, Steve, 40, 45 minutes at the most. And again, 3 sets of 10 to 15 reps. I'm guessing actually the higher end, really wanting to get a fucking sensation through the bottom, middle, and top of the chest. That the whole of the fucking chest is aching. It's not focused on one particular area unless he feels he needs to improve it. And again, the mind-muscle connection here, listeners, I guarantee you, again, looking at this workout, that we're not looking super heavyweights. We're looking at mind muscle, which is really about squeezing as hard as you goddamn can in the contracted position. I don't think we're looking at, maybe with the exception of the pec deck, what some people like to call as the sort of lighting it up or activating the pec or whatever else. We're again talking top professional bodybuilder here. It's just that he wanted to feel more what he was working and get a greater sensation and a sense of control over the workout, whether that was back or chest or whatever else. In fact, he himself said that he thought his back previously, Steve, was mediocre, and it was only by actually lightening the weights and working on that connection, as I was emphasizing earlier, that he was able to improve his back and arguably, Steve, potentially into the best shape that he's had in the last couple of years, at the last time he competed. I'll touch on that now briefly when we talk about his steroid cycle. So here's the thing, and let me emphasize this right at the beginning, right? So in more recent years, and this, I'm going to touch on the addictive personality and the relapses in the past, he's become far more health aware in terms of the impact that PEDs may have had on his body, certainly the training and arguably the addictions in the past. It's quite possible, Steve, that he's carrying blood issues, scar tissue issues, etc., cholesterol issues from the narcotics, etc., that he was using to quote unquote get happy and out of it, or whatever else you want to call it back in the day. And as he's got older again and matured, he's become more self-aware in that particular regards. And so he's also got a doctor buddy that he particularly works with, and they regularly, this isn't just a once a year thing, pre-competition. This is often, I'm guessing probably close to every month, Steve, having blood measures done, looking at things that are going on, etc., with his body. So here's what he's talked about more recently, and is again in the pre-show research that we do. He talks about specifically not using orals and tren until the last 4 weeks of a competition stack because of the impact they have on his health markers. So he's using them for the shortest period of time he can. He understands, and this is something I want to emphasize, Steve, that he has to use them to be competitive. And yet again, arguably, doing this very protocol, and we'll talk about other PEDs momentarily, doing this very protocol was in his last competition, arguably the best shape that he's had, which I think we're talking about 1, possibly 2 years ago. On stage, blew people's fucking minds, presented this physique that people thought wasn't possible. I think the photographs I saw was a off season and then a couple of weeks out from competition, and the difference was unbelievable. And yet he's more aware of health markers, and he's only doing the higher levels of the orals and the higher levels of the trend of any description in the last 4 weeks. So no orals until the last 4 weeks, no trend till the last 4 weeks. But I said to Steve in the pre-show, I think we could then argue that he is running them at the higher levels during that 4-week period. So he's going to get the most out of them he possibly can, make himself arguably a little bit unhealthy for those 4 weeks, but keeping the time to the least amount of time that's going to cause, hopefully, fingers crossed, the least amount of damage. So Steve and I were discussing, obviously, then what do we think he was doing? And I'm just going to touch on the last 4 weeks with the orals and the trend first, and then we'll talk about the rest of the cycle. So Steve, I mean, he could still use, obviously, Winstrol, but that could be injectable form, and that could be run arguably through the whole of the competition here. But again, he has the option of going for an oral version, because of course Winstrol can be consumed orally. I'm definitely going to go with Anavar, 100 milligrams a day daily. That is perfectly normal. In fact, some professionals will push it. And if he is going to push it for 4 weeks, he might even go above that, Steve. Tren. So this is the thing for me. Now, I would have said blood markers, health, etc. wise, lower, but I'm actually going to push it back up to 1,000 milligrams for those last 4 weeks. He knows how he's going to feel. He knows it's going to have an impact, but he needs to do what he needs to fucking do. And Steve and I have discussed it to multiple shows when we say training is almost a given for competing bodybuilders. So I know it's going to fuck me up for 4 weeks, but it's only 4 weeks. So you may as well push the envelope for those 4 weeks. So I'm going to push that to 1,000 milligrams. I mean, the obvious stuff here, Steve, would be, for example, pre 4 weeks and including up to the last 4 weeks of competition. I'm going to say testosterone, and I had sort of 1,000 milligrams. No, I'm going to push that to 2,000 milligrams, and purely and simply on the basis of he's a hyper responder still, but he's a competing bodybuilder. He's arguably top 20, top 30 in the world even now, and he's not doing the orals or the trend to the latter part of the competition cycle. So I'm going to see bigger numbers of the things that he can run earlier on in the cycle, Steve. And again, Masteron, 600, 800 milligrams, even as we just discussed in another show, Steve, perhaps 1,200 milligrams. And I'll say again, the reason for that at the higher level, purely and simply based on the shape that he was able to get into. What else? I mean, growth hormones, Steve, yes. I don't think he's having any particular issues with that physically. So I would say anywhere between 20 and 30 IUs a day. Go on.
So the episode that I interviewed Antoine, I also interviewed his coach, and this was 6 years ago, and it was episode 176. So you can look that up, Evolutionary Radio episode 176. Cool. And I can remember the interview pretty well. And I can remember in the interview, he said he hated insulin. So, and this was in 2018. It would have been either before he did the Toronto Pro or after. Maybe, so is a good chance he probably, you know, he could have changed his mind on it. I'm not really
Yes,
sure.
yes, possible.
But I
Yeah,
can
yeah.
remember at the time he did not like insulin. So I can tell you that he wasn't a fan of it. And one of the reasons he wasn't a fan of it, because he, you know, he really thought that insulin, you take insulin, you put on, you know, body fat. And that's something he wanted to avoid. So it seemed to me like he was more anti-insulin. So, but I'd be curious, you know, to know, because if you run growth hormone at a high amount, you've got to
Yes.
really, you know, you've got to put in the insulin to kind of
You
balance
can
things
hate.
out.
He probably hates the trend, Steve. But one of I'm going to go some back and forth on this because hating something is not necessarily not doing it. You see what I mean? And out of necessity, I mean, we know that
Yeah.
the health and
So
the
he could have
oils and the
changed his
trend are
mind
health.
because, yeah, over the
Yes,
next, he
of
had
course.
two Mr.
Yeah, six,
Olympia
7 years. Yeah.
competition. So he could have been like, you know what, I got to do it. Maybe when he did the Mr. Olympia in 2020, he's like, you know what, I got to up my game a little bit for 2022. We're coming off
Yeah,
of
I
the
mean, yeah.
COVID. And there's a lot of people that were in that competition in 2022. It's like, I got to push myself a little bit here to kind of move out. So maybe he did miss with the insulin a little bit more. We don't know,
I tell you,
you know?
I tell you a phrase that I really recall, and I don't think it's just him that said this. And in fact, it might even been one of those discussions with the other guys. The phrase they've used on occasion, I see this annoys me actually, and it's not them. Other people have used a different phrase, and I'm going to compare the two. So I was watching a show this morning by a couple of prep coaches in this country, and they used the word supplements when they referred to steroids. The supplements of steroids shouldn't really be in the same fucking phrase. One of the phrases I believe him and the guys did use, which is actually probably more applicable here, is a necessary evil. You don't have to fucking like something. I don't like Trent, but if I was going to miss the Olympia stage, you think I'm not going to use Trent? Of course I am. I'm going to hate how I feel. I'm going to feel toxic, but I'm going to do what needs to be fucking done. Now, the health marker thing is the reason why he's not doing Trent and it all to the latter part of his cycle for the last 4 weeks, doing it as a necessary evil to be competitive. Versus, like you said, with the I hate insulin doesn't mean he didn't use it. Might not. And again, as Steve says, using growth and insulin together is like bread and butter. You almost got to do it. But it might even be the addictive personality thing, Steve. Versus, for example, the testosterones, the mastodon, etc., don't necessarily require daily fucking injections, but the growth hormone and the insulin arguably do. So there may even be that element to, oh God, you know, I'm a professional bodybuilder. I do what I've got to do, necessary evil, but I don't want the fucking pin I hate having the pin every fucking day. I would argue that again, if you're going to go out there and make a career of professional bodybuilding, if you're going to make your sponsors happy, if you're going to put some cash in the bank that enables you to live the life that you want to live, sometimes you do what you have to do versus what you want to do. One of the things that him and the guys talk about, and I want to touch on PEDs again here, Steve. He says, I believe it was something to the effect of it would be too easy to talk about drugs per se, and then have people go out there and copy what I did or think that that's all that it is, versus, as we just did in the show that we recorded shortly before this one, the whole point of nutrition and learning how to train properly, etc., and of course, understanding what you do as a professional bodybuilder, understanding that people might just copy the cycles that you've done. It's great fun to talk about, of course. Here's the thing again, and it's more probably to do with his physical, mental maturity as opposed to physical. Understanding the reason that motivates him and what gets him on stage, knowing what he needs to do in terms of be competitive. And arguably, Steve, being probably the most competitive he's been for a very long time. The condition that I saw in a couple of photographs is probably the best condition he's ever fucking had. Of course, the game's moved on. Could he compete again in the future? Maybe. He's just on the cusp. He's 35, 36, something like that, years of age, a little bit older. There's not quite at the master's level yet, but there's something in there. Something else he talked about was maybe post bodybuilding, actually talking about long distance cycling. So there's an argument to be made for those big fucking quads, etc., and whatever else needs to be done. And of course, plenty of drugs used in cycling. So yeah, I mean, look, we're not talking about anything spectacular. Guarantee, as Steve says, that there's been changes in terms of what he's stacked in the past versus now. Certainly in terms of his self-awareness for health markers and that kind of thing, Steve. So I like the man that he's become, and I like the way that he comes across. What's your thoughts on that before we finish the show?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's definitely matured. I'll say that. From when the time I interviewed him those 6 years ago, he's definitely matured a lot from what the videos I've seen now, and his physique has improved quite a bit as well. And I'm more impressed with his physique now
Me too.
than I was even when he was getting fourth place at the Toronto Pro, which was around the time he was peaking. So I think that he's done a great job, and you know, hopefully he stays clean, and hopefully he can continue on his road and be an inspiration for others. That's what we definitely want.
Something that we encourage listeners, and we're quite happy to take comments on this in the below, also on the forums, and come and let us know what you think. Is we try to promote health, and I like the fact that he's thinking about himself now as he's got older. I love the fact that he's had quite the journey. I wouldn't have wanted to be in his shoes earlier on, but he's matured into something special now. And I think, you know, the whole, if he has still got some sort of addictive personality, it's out there, it's being discussed, it's a positive role model now, and he's giving out information. And again, he's monitoring his bloods. We talk about people should do this, get your bloods checked. Check out Steve's article on getting your bloods checked, etc. on the forums. Let us know what you think in the comments below, on the forums, etc., etc. Did we do a good show? What do you think about Antoine? Has he improved in your eyes as well? We're interested in hear what you've got to say about the subject. Please note, we are not doctors, and the opinions are ours, is our view and based on our experience and views on the topic. Our podcasts are for informational purposes and entertainment only. The freedom of speech and the First Amendment applies.